Hey, what's up? Hello, everyone. Today I'm excited to announce that we are bringing back Nazla Donmez to the podcast. If you remember, she was on the abortion debate over a year ago now, I think. But if you don't remember, or if you didn't see that episode, she's a fellow graduate of Chapman down in Orange County. She got a BA in Strategic and Corporate Communications and minors in Italian Studies and Journalism. She comes from a very multicultural background and is driven by a passion for art, history, and the study of culture. She's currently working as a producer, project manager, and writer both independently and with multiple creative studios in LA. Specifically today, we're bringing her on because she is Turkish and, from what I've gathered, spent a lot of her younger life inside of Turkey. And so, obviously, in the US right now, there's definitely some erosions of democracy, and the rhetoric that Trump used didn't help. And so, I'm just curious to hear what Nazla has to say about Recep Erdogan in Turkey and maybe the highlights or the parallels.
I'm doing well. How are you?
Yeah, I'm okay. The Packers lost. Haven't left the house in weeks.
Just the usual. Let's say I'm doing as well as I can in the current climate.
Yeah, aren't we all?
I guess that's a good way to put it.
So obviously I gave a brief little intro of just kind of your background, but for our listeners, like, I don't know, kind of enlighten all of us of what your maybe like younger years were like, because you spent most of your time in Turkey, right, when you were younger?
Sure. So I was born there. I was born in Istanbul. I lived there for about 18 years. I went to a French high school there, and then I moved to Paris for a couple of years to pursue film school. And I got it wasn't like a full college degree because I kind of quit halfways and came here and studied something completely different. But I've spent most of my time in Turkey, and I got to witness basically the change in politics, overall mentality, and the shift from a more secular regime to a more authoritarian and oppressive discourse.
Yeah,
So I grew up through that.
that's what I was doing my research. I learned like how for decades the military, I guess, was like inherent on trying to protect the secularism. So when you were like, was that obvious when you're like in schools and stuff? Did they talk about the importance of secularism in your education?
I mean, before French school, I went to an American school, so I was always in private schools and never went to state school. But I know from friends and within my education too, secularism was definitely a theme that was taught at a very early age. On top of that, the importance and the respect towards like military and their contribution to it was definitely evident in the curriculum. But we also had to learn about religion, which in a secular country should not be a mandatory course, in my personal opinion, and I feel like on a rational level. But that, like, there was a contradiction there, definitely. But mostly, it was a value. It was taught as a value. It was taught as a value. I would say that.
When you say you learned
something to protect.
When you learned about or the curriculum included religion, was that like mainly
it was
Islam?
A mandatory course, but it wasn't like world religions per se. It was mostly focused on Islam.
Okay.
And I mean more like moral section of it all. Like instead of teaching like, prayers or like the history of it, it was all about like how to be a better person, how to be kind, how to be, I don't know, generous, etc. That was the education I received during primary school. After that, I mean, I went to like French school, so we didn't really have much of that, but we still had it because the Turkish curriculum made it mandatory.
So was the military and kind of this whole idea of enforcing secularism, would you say it was successful?
I mean, when you look at the situation right now, I wouldn't say so. I mean, similar to what's going on here, and I don't know if you guys read it, but Harari wrote about it in like 21 Lessons for 21st Century. This discourse of secularism and military control, etc., that definitely excluded a group of people who don't want to live like that. And what Erdogan was able to do was to give a voice to those people who deemed themselves irrelevant and who were often ridiculed or oppressed in social ways, I would say. He kind of gave them a voice. So during his I mean, I guess you could say reign, you definitely saw that respect and admiration and trust towards the military crumble, especially with the coup or attempt at a coup or fake attempt at a coup. I don't know, whatever
All
you want
right. So you think so?
to get into that later, but
Okay. Okay. Well, yeah.
that definitely changed the minds of people. But people who are like me and my family who believe in secular values are obviously not comfortable with what's going on. I mean,
Uh,
I moved to another country, so.
really quick, outside of like the major cities, say like
Mhm.
outside of Istanbul, what's the climate like though amongst like say rural Turkey? Do you think there was a feeling like are they secular and do they support secularism?
I think the aspect of religion definitely has always got in the way of that. For instance, in the 40s, they had village institutions and they had adopted a more Western way of approaching education. But like even then, these institutes had to be closed down because people didn't want to send their daughters to school. So I think within Turkey, rural or the cities, the biggest problem is just ignorance, and sometimes religion really like fuels that ignorance. So even in like, I can't just say it's different in cities and it's different in rural areas because there's always that clash wherever you go. But definitely where people are less educated, there's a tendency to support more populist discourse, or like the similarity between Trump and Erdogan to me is really interesting because they speak with certainty and they have these aspirational messages that they have. Like with Trump, it was "Make America Great Again," and he kind of gave a voice to these low class people who were feeling like they were not included in the conversation, as well as rich people who didn't want to pay that much taxes, right? So what Erdogan did kind of was like make Turkey great again by turning its face towards the Ottoman Empire and like bringing back that world domination rather than, quote unquote, obeying Western countries by adopting their values. So I just can't like make a separation between rural and city because I think that just crosses those borders of, I don't know, like multicultural backgrounds or the cosmopolitan living. He was able to get into the minds of people who just didn't have a problem, living secular lifestyles earlier.
When I learned that, like, there was that big shift after the Ottoman Empire fell, that a figure named like Ataturk, I believe.
Atatürk.
Right.
Yeah.
So he like aggressively went against that. So he like banned headscarves and stopped wearing the fez to try and really shift the culture of Turkey, more Western. But he almost did it in an authoritarian manner for a while.
Definitely.
And so I wonder, like, because my question is like, how does someone like Erdogan so successfully change the constitution where he can appoint judges and where he can eradicate the parliament? Like how does that happen? And I wonder, is it because Turkey never quite got on its democratic roots? Like how do you feel about that?
Like I said, there was always a population that had what's the word for that in English?
I don't know.
This desire, I would say, this hunger to go back to that. Because I mean, like, telling people, "Oh, you're the best. We were this, we were that." Like, there's this discourse of it was like foreign forces. They don't want us to succeed. So he created this discourse of fear and like this, like pointing out an enemy, rather than this is what has been done wrong over the years internally, and we're going to fix this. So that's definitely something I think that fed into it. And he also definitely underlined the fact that there was an authoritarian undertone in what Atatürk did. But I mean, he had to. He could have just declared himself the new emperor and move on with his life, but he had a vision to build a new country. And that vision, I think, is lost to a lot of people who fall victim to this discourse. And It's also because Turkey never actually experienced being colonized, thanks to what Atatürk did. I don't think people actually have a sense of what could have happened. So it's very easy to glamorize Ottoman Empire when you didn't experience the repercussions of its fall in a way that other empires have experienced. So he definitely built on this lack of information, and there's also this huge nationalism in Turkey, especially with the military background. Like growing up at school, every Monday we would sing like İstiklal Marşı, and then you say salute to Atatürk, etc. It's you basically repeat this promise to be a great citizen every week, etc. Some people, I guess, don't really relate to that. They don't feel like they should be at the service of their country, and they expect it to be at service for them, but not in like the sense that it would be here. I don't know. So he definitely had the audience. He just picked them out, and he also comes from a very poor family, and people who are like him felt like more elitist leaders didn't relate to them. The one thing that's similar between, I feel like, Americans and Turkish people is that this love for the underdog. But like rather than in most Western countries, I mean, we see it in the UK too, but people want a qualified leader. I feel like some societies have more tendency towards voting for the charismatic guy, or voting for the guy who says what they want to hear, rather than looking at the facts. So there's a lot of factors within Turkish society, like the dynamic and the DNA of Turkish society, that played into that. I think that's why he was able to destroy something that took years to build within 20 years. But I don't think it's the end. I don't think it's fully destroyed, because now with the economy in a horrible state, people are waking up to it.
Well, before we get
So
to
we'll
the
see what
future,
happens.
before we get to the future, because I do want to ask you more about like what could happen.
Sure.
Let's dig into the nitty gritty of that coup, because
Okay.
I saw you say attempted coup, and then I remember hearing that a lot. So look, I really don't know much. What I learned is very preliminary, that the military. My understanding is that the military viewed Erdogan, as many as others in the past, as a religious threat to the secularism of the state. Tried to overthrow him, but Erdogan had so much public support that it failed. What's your opinion on what happened?
I was there when it happened.
Okay.
And, Turkey has a history of coups. And certain parts of it don't make sense to most of people, because coups are supposed to happen through, like, higher up people who have the ability to seize control. But the soldiers that were involved in this, and who refused to hurt citizens, and like citizens hurt them. There's a lot to unpack there, but there was no organization value to it. They weren't able to capture Erdogan, like compared to past examples. There's a lot there that's unanswered, and that's why people are a little. Did it really happen though? A lot of people think that it didn't really happen, but he used it as a way to discredit. Is that the word?
Yeah.
Discredit the military and kind of portray them as this enemy that wants to take the power away from the public and what the public wants. So that's speculation. You know what I mean? That's why I brought it up. Not that I necessarily believe that it happened one way or the other, but that is definitely a conversation a lot of people are having. And the other version is obviously what you said.
Just to be devil's advocate for a minute, I was reading out of the Cairo Review of Foreign Affairs, and they were talking about how there's nothing new with the military overthrowing governments to sustain this form of secularism over the years.
Yeah.
And so do you think that maybe Erdogan's somewhat popularity was, and this is kind of a two-parted thing here, so I apologize, but do you think that maybe this suppression of religious values over time was kind of this ticking time bomb that allowed him to use democratic norms to slowly transform the state? And then almost the coup was like the perfect just, icing on top of the cake, where, I mean, it's kind of right out of the authoritarian handbook, right? You blame the opposition, and since then, I mean, 50,000 people have been detained. So like, but
you point a finger.
Exactly.
I agree with you.
I'm just curious, like, was Erdogan wrong to kind of want to keep the military out of determining what is secular and what is not?
I mean, quote unquote, staging a coup to get there is obviously not the right way.
Sure.
But as an idea, yes, I do believe that what's secular or not should not be determined by the military. But in societies like Turkey, where you would say majority of people are not very educated, it's in the DNA of the country that higher up people deciding what happens to you. It's not an organic way of changing that comes from, like, what's the word for that? From bottom to top. It's dictated. You know what I mean? So obviously the nature of that is wrong. It should not be dictated, and certain things should be organically. But when you look at the history of the country, if Atatürk did not dictate a certain change, if he did not dictate this way of saying no and obviously fighting back, there would be no Turkey. So from an ideological or maybe like a philosophical perspective, opinions can vary, but I wouldn't say he's wrong to, like, obviously say that it should not be dictated by the military, but it should not be dictated by him as well. He used democratic values as a mask almost to get to the point he wants, so he can then dictate his ideal of Turkey, like an Islamic world leader, which was honestly, I believe that was his intention. And obviously his relationship with Iraq, etc., like that definitely showed him that's not gonna be happening in a while. But I mean, you cut one head off and replace it with the other, the end you'll get is obviously going to be of the same nature, if that makes sense. It's a Turkish saying, but I don't know if it translates.
It certainly seems interesting, though, because it seems like you have a nation that has a history of being aggressively secular, or at least post-Ottoman Empire. But then on top of that, a vast, at least from what I tell just based off of my limited knowledge of the statistics, is like, majority Islam or Muslim, and probably a good majority of, like, fundamentalist Islam. Like, Erdogan. Erdogan seems like even mentioned himself that he doesn't believe men and women are equal, right? That's a pretty bold statement for a world leader in today's age. And so it does seem like this. Really is. It does seem like, I guess it's hard for me to understand, like, authoritarian protection of secularism because I'm an American, but it does seem like it's basically either that or authoritarian Islam.
Yeah, like he gave a voice to people who glamorize and romanticize, like what you said, this way of living based on Islam. And I mean, I'm not a religious person, but I obviously grew up learning about Islam. And at the essence of it, the way you practice it, the way it's practiced in Turkey is completely different from other countries.
Okay.
It's way more relaxed and respectful of other people's choices. We have huge Jewish and Christian populations in Turkey, and who coexisted before. I'm not saying they coexisted perfectly, because there are incidents in Turkish history that obviously there was Muslims being aggressive with Christian people, and there are really shameful incidents. Like, I feel like it has been something Turkey has been struggling with since day one, because you make a change that comes from top, and some people are not going to be okay with it, and it had to be suppressed in various ways. But what he did was not only give a voice to these people, and it didn't stop at the point of, like, you're accepted, you're heard too. It has reached to the point that if you're not like me, you're a traitor. So he has given these people the incentive to what's the word for that? Ostracize, I believe.
Yeah, ostracize others.
Or like demonize others who are not like them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, because my biggest takeaway is I kind of see Turkey like very similar to the U.S. when it comes to the rural-urban divide, and it's something that Drew and I talked about like a month ago or so. But I noticed like the BBC talks about how last year his group, the Justice and Development Party, they won local elections but lost in Ankara, Istanbul, and Izmir. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it's funny because he gained popularity in Istanbul. Like that was like I think almost like a decade and a half or 2 decades ago. That was where he really gained stability
when
and
he
power.
was
And I see parallels to Trump. Because Trump's a New York billionaire who all of a sudden now probably doesn't even want to go back to New York because of how just unpopular he is. But he now appeals, like now his base is not in the city that gained him the popularity and the image. It's in these rural areas that I would almost have always wanted someone like that to fight for what they feel like is suppressed. And like I keep seeing time and again in my readings, like whenever I see Turkey, like I feel like a lot of more conservative people consider him to be a sultan, kind of in the same way Putin in Russia has been called the new czar, you know. And
he's like
I
a
just
rock
wonder,
star for them.
Yeah, exactly. And I almost feel like one revolution may change something temporarily, but you can't fight history and culture. And like the Bolshevik revolution in Russia, you know, got rid of the czar and brought about almost 100 years of oppression and chaos. But in the end of the day, Putin is as rich and entrenched as a czar 100 years earlier. And it seems like Erdogan is just part of that pendulum shift that goes back to, and so that's why I don't want to totally discredit some of the rural people in this situation, or the less educated or the more religious, because I feel like maybe that's just how the pendulum goes.
I completely agree with that. Like, I mean, we see this rise of authoritarianism all over the world right now, because in times of uncertainty, and that's something that's increasingly something we experience, people look up to people, doesn't matter if they're saying the truth or not, who speak with certainty, who set the frame for them to think, so they don't have to think for themselves. And obviously, I mean, like you said, like history kind of repeats itself. And that's why I use the word irrelevance, because just like Trump gave relevance back to people who are kind of looked down upon, you know, like rural white populations or not, or like people who have been ridiculed or like, you know, what's the word for that? Marginalized in the past.
There you go. Yeah.
Ostracized and marginalized in the past. He has done the same thing for these people. And it is true that within Turkish history, a lot of attention hasn't been given to these rural communities. And what he also did for Istanbul first, and as prime minister in the beginning, he did a lot of good things for the economy. That cannot be denied.
Sure.
And that also kind of gave him, I think, his personal idea of himself as the savior, and the people too, because he fixed a lot of things that seemed to be not working, at least in the beginning.
Yeah, it's a really good point.
I'm sure Putin did something good for Russia when, like, I'm not very familiar with this.
Absolutely.
Like background, but I'm sure he must have done something good, at least in the beginning, for him to rise to such popularity.
True,
or at least, I know.
Popular.
Yes. Yeah, so to reference what Naz is talking about.
You know, someone must have felt represented by him for him to rise to such power.
Exactly. So yeah, there was a huge GDP bump in the mid-2000s when Erdogan was in power, and then you know, and so that's exactly what Naz is talking about. And so yeah, I think we've covered, you know, how he got there. Let's talk about moving forward. Like, what does the opposition to Erdogan look like? Because you know, for me, an outsider, Erdogan is probably the only Turkish politician I can name. Is there anyone like on the opposition force that who's the new underdog that can maybe push the pendulum back, if there is one?
Well, historically, in Turkey, it's whoever is in charge of Istanbul, kind of has their path open to presidency.
Okay.
I mean, they're always one of the top candidates with Erdogan, and has happened before as well. So there's a person named Ekrem İmamoğlu, and like he was elected as mayor, and then they said, "Oh, you stole the election," and they repeated the election, and he won again. He's that guy. So he's definitely a candidate that a lot of people are hopeful about.
Did Erdogan's party say he stole the election?
Erdogan's party,
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
They said that he stole the election, and the election was repeated, and he was elected again with even more votes. So that kind of didn't work out for them. He's definitely a strong candidate in people's minds. Also, the mayor of Ankara is has a lot of support.
And these are more like
he
center
has a lot of
parties?
support.
Are these like center left parties or left parties or center left parties?
These are not left parties. The idea of the left party in Turkey is almost, I would say, on a mainstream level, non-existent.
Wow. Okay.
They refer to themselves as social democrats, but I mean, social democracy in the U.S. and social democracy in Turkey are also completely different. Sure. Because even the rightist of the right party will still support free education and healthcare. You know what I mean? Like,
wow, I can only imagine.
The conservatism of these parties, or the spectrum, is more about
religion,
I don't know,
identity.
Yeah, I would say so. I guess, yeah, that's a good way to put it. So there's Ekrem İmamoğlu, Mansur Yavaş, the mayor of Ankara, and then Muharrem İnce, who ran against Erdogan for presidency, I believe is starting his own party right now. The problem with Turkish opposition over the years that this is my humble opinion, but I think a lot of people would agree with me, is the fact that they are fighting against each other a lot, rather than collectively working for better. And that is a major problem. And I think that is one of the reasons people are they're not hopeful when it comes to the promises they make. Because a lot of people who have been voting for the main opposition party for years, they're like, where's the change? What's going to happen?
Dang.
But with the numbers like shifting in the parliament and whatnot, I feel like they're going to have more room to implement certain changes. I mean, Erdogan might kind of, tone down his discourse because he's scared to lose his power, or he might up it even more. I mean, he basically said stuff like things that are on the spectrum of, or like kind of around saying, if you're not with me, you're a terrorist. So
just a quick question, like, because there's a term out of the Kremlin in Russia, managed democracy, and they use it time and time again for what's his name, Alexei Navalny, like, and it kind of triggered that
he's
memory
jailed at the moment, right?
No,
Yes.
he's back in Russia though, and the argument is though that he's actually closer in politics to Putin than the left, and so the Kremlin, there's an argument that the Kremlin just keeps him around because he gives people a sense of democracy, because he's quite nationalist, he's quite right wing in a lot of ways, where he'd probably agree with Putin on stuff, but he's anti the Kremlin and anti corruption. So people think there's the facade of democracy. Do you think that's kind of similar in Turkey to a certain extent?
100%, because I mean, people, I feel like, especially career politicians, I genuinely don't think it's within their agenda to implement change or make things better. It's all about status, etc. And so I think a lot of these people pursue these positions not because they disagree with Erdogan, or like they have this desire to make things better for their country, but to just pursue the power and the privileges the position brings to them. And also, like you said, creating fake opposition that makes you look democratic, that is definitely something that's existent. I don't know if I would go as far as to say that about Turkish politics necessarily, but within Russia, I feel like it's possible.
Well, anything else we wanted to just touch on before we get out of here? We are kind of close to our time threshold. Any like final thoughts, Nazli, you want to give us about Turkey's authoritarian slip?
I mean, I think I got myself into enough trouble by speaking about it right now, but
well, I certainly.
I just want to say something about your previous podcast when you guys were talking about the attack on the Capitol. That kind of like reminded me of how like these people are so disinformed. That reminded me of like the social DNA of the Turkey, because like I feel like this, what the French called bataillesation. It's like everybody's speaking about everything without having any expertise or information on it. And the sphere of irrelevance, and obviously the disinformation fueled by the leaders. I think that's what led to those people to the Capitol. And I think that's also the driving force behind a lot of people in Turkey. So my final note would be just to like promote education and common sense.
Hell yeah, well you heard it there,
and
folks.
Thinking for yourself.
That's right, that's right. And doing your research beyond the first Google click you see.
Exactly.
Or your Facebook timeline. Well, that should wrap us up for this episode, guys. Thank you again, Nazla, as always. And for everyone else listening and watching, thanks
had a great time
for tuning in. Yeah. Yeah, let us know your thoughts. Do you see Turkey further slipping into authoritarian regime? Do you agree with Nazla's thoughts or not, or ours? Let us know in the comments, and be sure to check out the recorded version on YouTube, and for audio, Podbean, Apple Podcast, and a plethora of other sites. Thanks again for listening.
Auf Wiedersehen.